So you are thinking about getting a mantis piercing or piercings because it's usually done in a pair, but you're not sure about it, or maybe you're just curious about it. Well, we're going to cover everything you should know before getting one done. Coming up next in Consultations by a Piercer, episode number 22. So stick around. For those who are new to the channel, first off, welcome to the Body Piercing and Tattooing channel. Hope you're finding the videos helpful and useful and all that fun stuff, but you might not know who I am. My name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio located right here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. Now, the Mantis Piercing, for those that don't know, is usually a set of piercings done at the tip of the nose. These are like a nostril piercing, but instead of going through the side of the nostril, they go through the front of the nostril. This is a really kind of more modern piercing, not a very common one. I really haven't done that many of them. They are very rare, and they have their own little quirks about them, so to speak. Average healing time on these is anywhere, I usually say 3 to 6 months. You are going through thicker cartilage than you would with a normal nostril piercing, so you might see a slightly longer healing period than you would with a traditional nostril piercing. During which time, I'm going to suggest that you clean that twice daily to remove that discharge with a sterile saline. I personally like Nelmed's Piercing Aftercare. You can find various different brands or manufacturers at most good pharmacies. Mainly what you want to look for is the fact that it does state that it's sterile on the can. When you turn it over, the only ingredients that should be in there are sodium chloride and water, nothing else. There should be no other additives. The only other thing I'm going to suggest doing is at the end of your shower, kind of pull your hair and everything out of the way and just let the water kind of flow over the area for about roughly 30 seconds. The purpose of these two things, cleaning with saline twice daily and doing the shower trick, is to remove that lymph discharge. Your body's going to produce what's called lymph discharge, a harden, collect, and deposit on the jewelry. It's often referred to as the crusties. It's a normal part of healing, but we want you to remove it just in case that jewelry shifts or moves. We don't want it to agitate the piercing and all that healing tissue while it's going through its healing process. Now let's move on to the things you don't want to do. Cross-contamination prevention. Common sense stuff like washing your hands before you handle it. No oral contact. No exchange of bodily fluids. Keeping your environment clean. Clothing, bedding, towels, anything that may come in contact with it. Do not submerge the piercing in bodies of water you cannot control the quality of, which is pretty much everything but your own clean and well-maintained bathtub. I know people will go on and on about how clean their pool is and everything else. The problem with that is any body of water that's standing is going to have some form of contamination or microorganisms in it. You have, in this case, usually 2 open wounds on the front of your face. There's a possibility of one of those contaminants or microorganisms working their way into the piercing and then causing an infection. Now, that continues until the piercing is healed, or the period of time it takes for the body to close off that area and grow that tunnel of tissue around the jewelry. Keep pets away from it. Don't let them sleep in the bed with you. Especially smaller animals like to sleep up by your face and are attracted to shiny objects. Avoid contact with unclean objects. Number one culprit with that would be anything that comes near your face. Masks would be a big factor with this one. Though the pandemic has kind of came to a halt, there are still areas, like especially if you go to the doctor's office or certain high-risk businesses may require you to wear a mask. If you have to wear a mask during work, you really need to consider how much contact the tip of your nose is going to have with that mask and how that could possibly be a problem. If you are required to wear one on a regular basis, you're going to need to change it constantly. The reason being is they get damp and wet and they start absorbing your breath and the things that come with your breath. It can be kind of a breeding ground for bacteria inside that mask that may cause issues. Now let's talk about trauma, pressure, and abuse. It is on the tip of your nose. You are going to come in contact with stuff that you didn't realize your nose comes in contact with. This piercing is out there and looking to make contact with a lot of different things and possibly intimate partners. You really need to be diligent about isolating this piercing and avoiding contact, pressure, and trauma. Of course, do not sleep on the piercing. I don't know how that would work, but possibly even on your side, there might be enough contact that it'll cause issues. You need to figure out some way of elevating off the bed while you're sleeping that isn't going to be undone by your sleeping self. Do not spin, rotate, or move the jewelry. I know you've probably been told to do that in the past. There is no purpose to that. There is no advantage to that. All you're doing is increasing the amount of agitation the piercing is receiving and asking to have issues. Also, keep cosmetics away from the area, especially powder-based or foundation makeups. If you use any type of cleanser or facial cleanser that tingles when you apply it or is harsh or gritty, I would suggest keeping that away from the piercings until they are completely healed. Now let's talk a little bit more about jewelry. With this piercing, because where it's located at, the amount of space that we kind of want to limit that. You're going to want to start with labret studs, either threadless or threaded. Personally, I would prefer threadless, easier to take care of, easier to deal with, plus more variety for the most part. You don't want to put nostril screws in this one or L-bends, just basically because there's just not as much room as there would be if you were doing a side piercing, nostril piercing, or a traditional one. If you have ended up with threaded labret studs, you do need to check the tightness of those balls on a regular basis. I usually suggest doing it weekly. Pick out a day of the week, and that's ball checking day. That always gets a laugh whenever I mention it. People's minds, they're so filthy. But, yeah, you want to check them on a regular basis. They can come unscrewed on their own, and usually when they do come unscrewed, they're either in a situation where you can't get them back on or you can't find them. So it's best to check them on a regular basis. Threadless ones, less likely to do that. If you do catch the jewelry on something, it's always a good idea to stick your finger in your nose and kind of pinch the two together or apply pressure on the outside just to make sure that thing is still in there the way that it's supposed to be. Now, you're going to be pierced initially with longer posts than are actually needed. Once that swelling goes down, there's no reason to have those longer posts in there, and it's probably going to increase your likelihood of getting caught and snagged on things. So it's a good idea to go ahead and downsize in roughly 4 to 6 weeks. I do suggest going and seeing your piercer and having them do it professionally. Usually most piercers, because they want you to downsize the jewelry, are going to give you a bit of a discount on either changing the jewelry or the price of the jewelry itself. We basically just take the old post off, put the new post in, and away we go. Little word on things like chains, accessories, charms, large gem settings, etc. This is on the tip of your nose, especially during the healing process. I wouldn't advise putting anything on there that's going to really attract attention to objects, get caught on things. Is more likely larger pieces that are going to be come in contact with things more readily. Usually with this, I do suggest kind of a single point gem, just one gem, or something very simple like cones, or the screw head ends, or just plain old balls. Usually simple and small is best initially during the healing process. Now, you can wear rings in this, though I don't think I've ever seen a photo of anybody doing it. You really are looking at, you want to wait a minimum of a year. This is thicker tissue, so the piercing is a little bit longer, thus a longer healing period, and the more prone it is to issues. The longer a piercing takes to heal, the more likely you are to see problems. When it comes to rings where you're basically putting something in there that's going to change the shape of that piercing, you really want to wait till that piercing is well seasoned, so a minimum of a year. Now let's talk about pain. This one tends to be a little bit more than a normal nostril piercing. I would say closer to probably between a 4 and a 6. It will make your eyes water. Anything that has to do with your sinuses will generally do that. As far as the aftermath, you might see a bit of slight bleeding, though it's pretty rare if it's done correctly. You might also see have some throbbing or aching pain that'll last anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes. Then it's going to be tender to the touch. You're also going to see redness, discolorization, heat, of course, tenderness to touch. and swelling anywhere from 3 to 5 days. Now, if that occurs during that period of time, then it's probably normal. But if it occurs later, you really do want to go see your piercer because there might be something else going on. Also, additionally, if you cause trauma to the piercing, it's not uncommon to notice that for the days following. Now let's talk a little bit about anatomy. Because this is located on the front of the nostril and nobody's nose is perfectly straight or perfectly even, we try to pierce it in a way that makes it look like the two match each other. If you get out a ruler and start measuring, it probably will not match perfectly. It's usually done angled to the tissue or to the anatomy. Some people, if they have more of a button nose, seem to do better with this piercing, where it's kind of more flat on the front. But this is a spear-like shape on most people, and it isn't always the best option. You need to talk to your piercer because often, instead of having them straight on like you would like them to be, they need to be a little bit off-center or off-angle so they match that tissue. If you do them straight in, the jewelry's not going to sit right in the back, and it probably isn't going to sit right on the front. It's going to seem a little odd, and you're probably going to be more prone to bumps or other issues. Now let's talk about a few other things you want to consider. The first one being is this one is more of a bold statement type piercing. A good example of this would be, and a lot of it comes down to what is normal in general society. There's kind of two extremes when it comes to piercings. There's the elegant kind of accenting the area or enhancing the area, and then there's the bold statement. This piercing falls under that bold statement kind of category. What I'm talking about, just kind of give you some piercing examples, it's going to be pretty simple or more elegant or more about enhancing the area, to have just a small single diamond stud in your nostril, opposed to having a 2-gauge plug. The 2-gauge plug, where you've stretched out your nostril or had a dermal punch used, is going to be a much bolder statement. It's more about saying, this is the look that I want. This is how I want to shape my body. This is how I want to represent myself to the world. That smaller, just single one, is more about just enhancing the area. This piercing tends to be a little bit more on that bold side, partly because it's not a common piercing. It's a rare piercing, but it's definitely one that people notice. There's no way around it. You are going to get noticed if you have this piercing. You're going to get asked a lot of questions because people don't see it as often as other piercings. So be prepared for that and understand that when people ask you about it or make statements about it, it has nothing to do with them being jerks. It has more to do with them being curious about it. And every time that happens, that gives you an opportunity to educate people and kind of build up some of that tolerance we could all use in our lives. Another thing, if you are involved with any type of sport activities, dance, theater, hobbies, anything that requires a uniform or has a dress code, you need to speak to whoever's in charge and make sure that this piercing is not going to be an issue. It's not uncommon for them to say that you cannot wear jewelry while competing or performing, and this is not going to be a piercing that you can take out and leave the jewelry out for long periods of time and have no problem getting it back in until it's extremely seasoned, 2, 3, 4 years into the process. And even then, every time you take the jewelry out, there's always a risk of the piercings closing. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, but there's retainers. Retainers are often as easy to notice, especially with something that is this pronounced on your nose and this pronounced on your face. People are going to pick up on it. And if it's a situation where you're not allowed to compete with any type of jewelry in, they aren't going to let you compete, period. Next one is, are you leaving on vacation? Are you taking a trip, business trip or else or whatever, where you're going to be in an environment where you cannot control how clean it is, and it's going to be a more stressful situation that oftentimes trips cause. All these things can increase your likelihood of infection or other problem. The other concern is the swimming. Everybody you hear conflicting things all the time. As I mentioned earlier, it's a pool. It's got chemicals in there that help keep the water clean, but it doesn't mean that it is completely devoid of microorganisms. When you're on vacation, you're often exposed to microorganisms that aren't in your home environment, and you may or may not have built up an immunity to because you've never been exposed to it. So you're at even higher risk when you're on vacation of contracting an infection and a healing piercing. So it's usually best to wait until after the vacation or heal that piercing out, then go on the vacation or business trip. And the last thing is always sleeping and isolating. This thing's on the front of your nose, these piercings. You're going to be more prone to bump it, snag it, catch it, etc. You really don't begin to realize how often your nose touches things until you have a piercing there. This is a little bit more compounded because of where they are located at. It's right there at the tip. Even something as simple as tipping a bowl up to finish the last of the soup may be a complicated and uncomfortable process. So always keep that in mind. And it's very important to isolate these piercings. Don't sleep on them. Don't touch them. Don't play them. Just kind of put them in the forbidden zone and avoid contact. Well, that's it. Till next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Take care, and we'll see you in the next video. Maybe that one or that one.